very much, Carla. So thank you ever so much, everyone who've come along and joined us today for this next session. So my name's Tammy, Partridge-Smith, and I'm the Mental Health First Aid Business Development Manager, but I'm also a Mental Health First Aid Instructor for Black Country Healthcare. And I'll pass you over to Kay because I will be co-delivering this session with my colleague Kay today. Kay?
I think my mute might have been on then. I do apologise. I do that very often. I do apologise. So my name's Kay Higgins. I'm a mental health first aid instructor. Work with Tammy for Black Country Healthcare Foundation Trust. My primary role is to deliver mental health first aid training, both internally and externally for staff. So that's a little bit about me.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much, Kay.
No problem.
Okie dokie, so we've given a brief introduction, and what I did want to say first and foremost is we're happy to take any sort of questions at the end. Happy for you to post any messages within the chat function, and perhaps we can pick that up towards the end. What I did want to say is with mental health first aid, myself and Kay, although we instruct in mental health first aid, we aren't qualified mental health practitioners, so there is a little bit of a difference, but hopefully we can explain a little bit about that as we go along. But we're certainly happy to pick up any questions around mental health first aid and how mental health can impact with menopause. Lovely. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the mental health continuum model and how the menopause can have an impact upon everyday well-being. So the menopause, as we know, it's a natural part of ageing, and that usually occurs between the ages of 45 and 55 years of age. And as we know, again, it's as women's estrogen levels decline. So studies have shown that menopause symptoms can have significant impact. Right, I think someone's just closed my video sharing, so if you bear with me, I'm going to load that back up.
Okay. Wonderful.
Okay.
Technology.
Okay, so I'll just carry on there. Okay, so studies have shown that menopause symptoms can have a significant impact on our attendance and our performance in the workplace. So with this in mind, let's take a look at how our well-being is made up of two factors: our well-being and our mental health diagnosis. So as you can see from both axes, you can see that we've got maximum well-being and we've got minimum well-being. We've also got no diagnosis and diagnosis. Now, have some time to look how each and every one of us. Could I just ask, if you've still got their mics on, that you could just mute your mics just for the moment, please? Thank you. Okay, so let's take some time just to have a look through each one of the four quadrants, and let's see how any one of us can sit with any one of these four quadrants. Okay, so like we all have physical health, we've all got mental health as well. And the key to achieving maximum well-being is to have a good equal balance.
The new money being offered by the government may not be enough to the highest level of coronavirus.
Thank you. Okay, so as I was saying, as we've all got physical health, we've all got mental health too. So the key to achieving maximum well-being is to have a good equal balance between health and health. So as you would have heard if you've just listened to the financial well-being section a moment ago, mental health is fluid, and so we will recognise being in any of these four quadrants throughout our lives. So quadrant 1 is where someone would have no diagnosis of any mental ill health, any disorder, and they would have quite positive well-being. This may be a person who's experiencing good menopause management, both physically and mentally, and have very little disruption to day-to-day life. Okay, so in quadrant 2, this would be someone who has no mental illness or disorder, but they are perhaps experiencing poor mental well-being. So examples here could be that they are having negative experiences, they're ongoing, and perhaps their symptoms or treatment are not well managed. In quadrant 3, this is where a person has a diagnosed mental illness or a disorder, and they're also experiencing mental well-being. So, for example, this person would have a mental health diagnosis and they're not coping particularly well. For example, this could be impacting upon their work performance, it could be relationships, or perhaps it's impacting upon their hobbies and their interests, for example. And in quadrant 4, this is where someone would have a diagnosed mental illness or a disorder and they're experiencing positive well-being. So if we take a moment just to reflect on where we all are at the moment, or perhaps where we may have been in different times in our life. Mental health is fluid and we're never stuck in one quadrant. This nurtures hopes for many individuals. We can move down, but we can move up. So in terms of supporting someone or managing yourself, it's not whether there is a diagnosis or not, but it's how our mental well-being is. So it's more about the top to bottom approach. Okay, so we've probably all heard of the word stigma by now. And stigma runs through the continuum like black pill runs through a stick of rock. And this can impact people in every single quadrant. So examples could include if perhaps someone was in quadrant 1, so they're experiencing maximum mental well-being and they've got no diagnosis. Others may think, well, what have they got to be worried about? They've got a house, they've got family, they've got money. Or maybe it's self-imposed stigma. So you may be thinking, well, I'm always okay. Why can't I cope with the way the things I used to do? I can't be seen to not be okay. So others who are in other quadrants may feel as though someone in quadrant 1 can't relate to how they're feeling. They may think that you've got no idea what it's whether they do or they don't. It may be that you've got no diagnosis, but perhaps you're not feeling or experiencing full mental well-being. Others may think, well, it's not like you've got proper depression or anxiety, it's only the menopause. Or they may think, you just need to accept it. All women go through it. What's different about you? It would be worse. Perhaps in quadrant 3, you have a diagnosis, but you are experiencing minimum mental well-being. Some others may think perhaps you're going to be reliable. Maybe they think you're going to be hard to work around. Maybe they think that they will be expecting special treatment. Good, interesting. And then ultimately, in quadrant, perhaps you've got that diagnosis, but you're experiencing well-being. Some people may think they've got a condition, how can they be okay? They don't look like they've got anything. How can they cope with the diagnosis and manage their thoughts? Maybe they'll need time off. Maybe they'll feel difficult.
Tammy, can I just ask very quickly, if you're not on sort of a microphone, could I request that you move to a microphone? The voice is not as clear as it probably could be.
No problem. I'll just pop that in now, Carla.
Lovely, wonderful, thanks. I think it's just because you're such a long distance away. Fabulous. Give me a shout, Tammy, when your microphone's in. I'll just do a quick test.
Microphone's in.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Lovely. So I'm going to pass you over to Kay now, and Kay's going to go through a couple of case studies that we've put together. Okay.
Lovely. Thanks, Tammy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got some scenarios that we've put together just to work through, and some people might recognise elements of these scenarios in their own situations, perhaps. So the first scenario we're going to look at is from a male partner's perspective, and the impact on a relationship. So we're starting in that top right-hand quadrant that Tammy's explained. So a person with no diagnosis of mental illness and is coping okay, and they have good well-being. So our case study 1 is Robert. Robert is married to Rosie, and they've been married for over 15 years. So Robert's 52 years of age and Rosie's in her mid-50s. Both have full-time jobs. Rosie's a medical secretary at the local hospital, and Robert is a qualified chef and runs their own family restaurant. So they've always shared the responsibilities of running the home, the business, and raising their 2 sons. And with the current situation, there's been additional pressure, as we know, on finances, due to the restaurant struggling slightly and having to actually close at one point. One of their sons is now back from university temporarily, and the second son has moved back home after a relationship breakup. So this is adding a little bit more pressure on everyone financially and emotionally in the household. So Robert's always found Rosie to be really supportive and calm under pressure. However, he's noticed that lately she's very irritable and snappy. And seems to sort of blow up at the smallest of things. They're arguing more, and whatever he says seems to be wrong. He's noticed that Rosie isn't sleeping well, and her moods are very extreme at times. He tries to reassure her that things will sort themselves out. And when he does this, she either becomes very angry or breaks down in tears. He's really beginning to question their relationship, and if Rosie still loves him. He often wakes up at night to find Rosie has moved into the spare room, and when he asks her what is wrong, she breaks down in tears and says she feels so angry all the time and under pressure. Robert feels everything's his fault and he can't support his own family, and that he's a failure and his marriage might be over. So the situation is really having an impact on Robert, and we start to notice that Robert is moving down on that continuum to the bottom right-hand corner. If we could click on, thanks, Tammy. So Robert's experiencing sort of a feeling of lowness in mood. He feels he can't do anything right. He feels he's a complete failure. He can't sleep or eat properly. It's really having a sort of knock-on effect, and he feels everything around him's dissolving and falling apart. Financially, he has concerns due to temporarily having to close the restaurant, and he feels he can't approach Rosie for support as he's always done in the past. With both sons at home, it's adding more pressure financially and even more work for Rosie after a full day at work. So she's really feeling the strain. So Robert has quite a good relationship with his mother-in-law, and she can see that things aren't as they used to be. There's certainly something going on for both parties. And Robert has a conversation. Mother-in-law actually approaches him and just expresses her concerns to what's going on, and asks if there's anything she can support with. She does reassure him, and she is able to offer some thoughts on how the menopause can affect some women and how it can be a strain on relationships and how she was affected herself. She also explains that the signs and symptoms he's explaining are completely normal, and there's plenty of help and information out there. So she encourages him to try and learn a bit more about the menopause and the changes that can occur in a woman's life at this time, and reassures him that although the current financial situation is difficult for everyone, Rosie will be trying to deal with extra emotional strain, both emotionally and physically. She also tells him not to blame, and suggests some ways in which he might approach Rosie and talk about how he's feeling. He also encourages him to have the conversation and perhaps talk together in their own space, perhaps go out for a meal or sort of get outside of the house where they can have some time together and have a chat. He decides to do this and approaches Rosie, but she also recommends that he thinks about his own self-care as well, because he's obviously feeling the strain of everything. So he decides to take up a new hobby himself, so that he can start to look after his own self-care, which recharges his batteries as well, and also gives him the strength to be able to support Rosie. He first suggests that they make an appointment to go to the GP and discuss some of the options available. And he also encourages her to join perhaps some support groups around the menopause, so she can chat with other women experiencing the same symptoms, so she knows she's not alone. He also suggests joining in with her a new eating plan and exercise plan, so they can start going for walks together on a regular basis, which gives them some one-to-one time as well. And he thought this might help with her sleep patterns. By talking to Rosie and her mum and reading lots of information on the subject, Robert has now gained a better understanding and awareness and feels he's in a position to support and help Rosie more. Due to being better informed, he feels in a much better place, and financial pressures are starting to lift as the restaurant reopens. All these sort of combined together, I know it's an ideal world and it doesn't happen that quickly, but with all this input, that's moved Robert back up to that top right-hand quadrant, and he feels in a better place and very well supported. That's our first case scenario, so we can see how someone's moving around on there and how it does impact or can impact on relationships and people around us. Our second case scenario, we've got a lady starting at the top right-hand quadrant. This lady's Sophia, so I'd like to introduce you to Sophia. She's 46 years of age. She is divorced, but she's divorced from her husband 4 years ago and lives in a rented house with her 16-year-old daughter and her 18-year-old son. So Sophia works full-time as a staff nurse, and this does incorporate shift work. Around 6 months ago, she was successful in being appointed as a senior staff nurse and has been enjoying the responsibilities of the new role. She's always been quite fit and active and enjoys a good balanced diet. So her well-being, mental well-being, is in a really good place there. However, over the last 4 months, she's been struggling with her weight and she does feel tired a lot of the time. She's struggling to go off to sleep and constantly wakes up during the night with hot sweats and heart palpitations. She feels tired in the morning and is struggling with her shift patterns. She's noticed that her moods are very unpredictable and finds herself being very short-tempered and snappy with those around her, especially her family. She's lost a lot of confidence and she feels old and unattractive, which in turn has caused her self-esteem to plummet. Although she's always enjoyed her job, she's now found herself dreading going to work and feels completely overwhelmed by the responsibilities of managing other people. Her concentration's limited and she's finding she can't remember the smallest of things. She's worried that she'll make a fool of herself or her team will think she's incompetent as a senior nurse in her new role. This is all feeding into a lack of confidence and self-esteem, and she's beginning to feel extremely anxious. So as you can see, Sophia is moving down towards that bottom right-hand quadrant. She feels she should reduce her hours at work, but financially she can't afford to do this and wouldn't be able to afford her rent and bills, etc., and to provide for her 2 children. So she doesn't feel this is an option. She feels a little bit trapped in the situation that she's in. Unfortunately, at this point, things do deteriorate slightly more, and Sophia starts to feel fearful of the future and is constantly running scenarios over in her head and analysing situations at work. So as you can see, Sophia is starting to edge towards that bottom left-hand quadrant of the mental health continuum. She feels she can't deal with the pressure in the same way that she used to. And to top everything, she's been asked to train the team on a new IT system, which is that sort of situation where you think someone's gone 0 to 60 in a few seconds, when actually how long has an individual been at 59? It seems to be sort of the icing on the cake for Sophia. She feels completely out of her comfort zone and is unsure why and what she should do. She's She's begun controlling the way she feels by continually cleaning the house and checking things, as she thinks this takes her mind off her anxieties and feels more in control when she's doing this. Sophia goes into work on the day that she's due to train on the new system, and she breaks down in tears. She has a good relationship with one of the other senior nurses, and she takes Sophia to one side to have a chat. So you can see now Sophia's sitting in that bottom left-hand quadrant. So her work friend and colleague takes Sophia to a room where they can have a good chat about things. Unfortunately, Sophia opens up to a colleague about how she's been feeling and what's been going on for her. She suspects she's perhaps in perimenopause for some time, or has been for some time, and things are gradually getting worse. She confides in her colleague about the heart palpitations and the hot flushes, the mood swings and the irritability with people around her. And she explains the feeling of dread and fear that she's been experiencing, and that she's worried about talking to anyone in work in case they don't think she's capable of doing her job. So you can see where that self-imposed stigma is stepping in there. Sophia's colleague is very understanding and asks Sophia if she would like her to make a GP appointment, or even if she would like her to go with her. So they take the next steps and they arrange for Sophia to see the GP. A close friend attends with her. They have a good chat with the GP. He arranges an ECG check for the palpitations, numerous blood tests, and they discuss options. She is approaching the menopause, and she decides to start a course of HRT along with some health supplements. And Sophia decides she's going to look at ways in which she can learn to relax more to manage her anxieties. She attends a new online group of women that are also in perimenopause and some in mid-menopause, and they share their experiences and coping strategies, which is really reassuring for Sophia and she finds really beneficial. Some CBT sessions are set up to help with her OCD. And Sophia said that the education around anxiety in the menopause and talking to others in similar situations has probably been some of the most effective treatment for her. Her workplace also have made some temporary adjustments for her to her hours, and she's so that she can still work the same amount of hours, but on a different rota for the time being until things settle a little for her. So with the right help and a diagnosis and a support network, you can see Sophia has moved up to that top left-hand quadrant of the mental health continuum, which is really reassuring for individuals that we're not stuck in one quadrant. With the right support, we can move around. I'll hand over to Tammy now for the third and final case study.
Thank you, Kay. Okay, so our third and final case study is Mark. So Mark is a 55-year-old male and he's a full-time service program manager. And he has a previous history of a diagnosed depression, which is now managed with medication. So Mark manages a small mixed-sex team in an IT department and is approached by a long-standing female staff member, Joanne, aged 52. So Joanna's been experiencing bouts of flat mood and feels it's started to impact upon her job role. She's approached Mark because she now feels that it is affecting her self-esteem after missing an important deadline, which could have caused a lot of problems with a recent project the team have been working on. Mark did feel that Joanne had been a bit more withdrawn than usual, as she had been complaining of feeling stressed lately and had been arriving late for work a few times. So Mark had kept a watchful eye upon Joanne, as her display of flat mood resonated with his own experiences in the past. So Mark listened to how Joanne was feeling and he agreed to regularly check upon how things are for her, and he was willing to support her by looking at how they can manage her workload differently. So Mark has a partner who is of similar age to Joanne, and this has given him an insight to how females can experience a variety of issues around the age of menopause, which doesn't just stop at hot flushes and sleepless nights, for example. So following the chat that Mark and Joanne had, Mark decided to contact HR to ask for the trust policy on how he could best support Joanne, and he went on to offer Joanne a referral to occupational health for further guidance. Joanne felt instantly better after opening up to Mark first and foremostly. She felt that she'd put off the conversation for months. She was hoping it was just a phase, and she thought it would work itself out and manage itself on its own. So Mark and Joanne met up regularly over a course of 6 months, and Joanne reported that after seeking additional support from occupational health, she realised that the heart of her problems were that she'd been putting off seeking medical advice from a GP. And she did feel that had she have sought advice earlier, she could have been provided the right sort of treatment from the start. And she may not have felt that she'd had to have managed her experiences alone. So with the right support in place, Joanne now moves to the top right-hand quadrant. So there we go. We've sort of covered 3 different scenarios, and as Kay mentioned earlier, these are very much in the ideal world, but I think it just sort of embeds what we mean by mental health is that it isn't stagnant, it is fluid, it will move, it can move, but with the right support, anyone can change top to bottom, bottom to top. We can change fluidly around the mental health continuum. And so for us, really, what we want to look at really is what types of stigma do we feel employees may have from disclosing their concerns and issues about what they've got going on for them, and does this resonate with any of the barriers that we have ourselves towards disclosing this in order to receive help and support. So that's our little walk through the mental health continuum, and we're happy to open the floor for any questions.